Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm giving you my March TBR and my ranking of all of Taylor Swift's albums. Now that might seem like an unbelievably random combination, but it does make sense because in March I'm participating in the Tis the Damn Readathon, which is a readathon entirely based on Taylor Swift and her albums. It's a readathon hosted by a bunch of Taylor Swift fans like Emma from Drinking by My Shelf, and it sounds like a lot of fun. And I love Taylor Swift's music. I've been listening to Folklore and Evermore non-stop basically ever since both of them came out. So I can't wait for this readathon, and I had a lot of fun putting together my TBR as well, because they've created a bit of a bingo board, I'll show it right here, with all 9 of Taylor Swift's albums, and you can decide for yourself if you want to read books for all of the albums, or if you want to fulfill the prompts in a different way, or if you will just go for 3 books or 3 albums. It's all very casual and relaxed, which is how I love my readathons. But I want to try to fulfill a prompt for every album, so 9 albums. But that doesn't mean that I want to read 9 books, because that's a bit much. I could do it, but I want to do some other stuff in March as well, so I'm not going to push myself. For each album there are 3 prompts, 2 of which are reading prompts. There's one reading prompt that fits with the title of the album, then there's one reading prompt that fits with the title of one of the songs, and then there is a third prompt which also fits with the title of one of the songs, but it's a bit of a different prompt. It's for an activity or something else. If you want to know more about this, I'll leave the link to the video down below. But without further ado, let's get into my TBR, which will also be my ranking of the albums. I'll start with the album and the prompts that are lowest on my list and work my way up to my number 1 favorite Taylor Swift album. So in my opinion, Reputation is Taylor Swift's weakest album. There are not a lot of songs on there that I like. I really like Don't Blame Me, but other than that, they're all just kind of to me. So it was very easy for me to put this on the lowest spot. And the book that I want to read for Reputation is based on the song Look What You Made Me Do, and the prompt is a book that has been recommended to you by a friend. And for that I chose Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Over the years this has been recommended to me quite a few times, but most recently by Connor, whose channel I'll leave down below. He read it last year and he really loved it, so that made me excited to pick it up as well, which is why I bought a copy. So for those of you who don't know, Giovanni's Room is a classic within gay literature. It is set in 1950s Paris and it's about an American man who gets engaged to a woman, but then he starts to have an affair with an Italian bartender called Giovanni, and it's about him questioning his sexuality and his identity and things like that, I think. It's supposed to be really, really good and I'm excited to read it. Then we move on to number 8, and for that I chose Red. This is not a bad album at all. I really love the song All Too Well. There are some other songs I really love from this album, but this is simply the album that I've listened to the least, apart from Reputation. So I don't really know it that well, I don't really have a connection with it, so because of that it ended up low on the list. And for this album I went for the prompt Red on the cover, which makes sense as a prompt given the name of the album. And for that I want to read Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I wasn't really planning on reading this in March, but then I found out that a couple of people are hosting a Daughter of Smoke and Bone read-along. So I think there's Gabby from Books and Nerd Things and Kira from the book Bella and some other people, and they are hosting a read-along for the entire series. This is a trilogy, and they will read the first book in March, the second book in April, and the third book in May. And I've really been wanting to read this series for a long time, and I considered skipping the read-along because I'd already planned out my TBR for the Tis the Damn Readathon, but then I thought that was a bit of a pity, because I think if I wouldn't join the read-along then I probably wouldn't end up reading the books soon. And I really loved Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. It's one of my favorite fantasy books, so I really want to read her earlier works, and this trilogy is her most famous work other than Strange the Dreamer, I think. I really don't know all that much about what it's about. It's a fantasy trilogy. I think it's set in the same universe as Strange the Dreamer, but I'm not entirely sure. And I don't have a copy of the book, but I'm going to buy it for my Kindle. And I'm really excited about finally reading this, because this is one of those books that's been on my TBR for a very long time. But because I don't have a physical copy and it's a bit of an older book in terms of YA fantasy, there's never really an incentive for me to read it, so I forget about it. So I'm very happy that this read-along is now going to happen and I will finally read it. Then spot number 7 is for Speak Now. I do really like this album. There are some songs on it that are absolute bangers, like Story of Us, and I'm blanking, but there are way more. But somehow this is just not one of my favorite albums. I haven't actually picked a book for this album yet, because the third prompt, so the prompt that's not necessarily bookish, but this one is actually bookish, is to listen to an audiobook. And I decided to pick the audiobook at the start of the month or during the month, so I've not picked it out beforehand. On spot number 6 I've put Taylor Swift, which is her very first album, and I really love this album. I've actually got it on CD, I think it's still at my parents' place and I've listened to it a lot, but the other albums are just a bit better in my opinion. I really love Picture to Burn, I really love Our Song, there are so many good songs on that album. For this I had picked out a book because it fits with 2 of the prompts. The first prompt is to read a memoir because the album is self-titled, and the second prompt is to read a book about music, which was for Our Song, and I had decided to read Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. This is his autobiography and it's supposed to be really good, and I have been wanting to read it, but it's also I think over 550 pages long, or at least over 500 pages long, and I've got quite a list of books to read. And then when I added Daughter of Smoke and Bone, which is also over 400 pages, I just figured this probably isn't going to happen because I'll probably won't read this very fast either. So if by some miracle I end up finishing all of these books I've got on my TBR and I still have some time to spare in March, I might pick this up, but I'm not counting on it. So instead of that I'm going to do the non-bookish prompt, which is for Picture to Burn, and the prompt is to take a bookish photo and put it on your Instagram stories. Then on spot number 5 we've got Fearless, which is also an album I have on CD and which is also at my parents' place. These are the albums I listened to when I was a teenager and I really like it, but again it just didn't end up any higher. My favorite song from this album is Hey Stephen. There's just something about it that I absolutely love and that makes me cheerful every time I listen to it, and I think that song would actually be pretty high up on my list of favorite Taylor Swift songs. For this album I decided to go for the prompt read a YA novel, which is for the song 15, and for that I chose He Forgot to Say Goodbye by Benjamin Alira Sanz. This is actually also on my list of 10 books I have to read in 2021, which is a list I make at the start of every year of books I really want to get to that year. Benjamin Alira Sanz is one of my favorite authors and I've had this book on my shelf for quite some time, but I somehow haven't read it. I'm also not really sure what it's about. I just picked it up when I found it in a bookshop in London, I think. But I think it's about 2 boys who are from completely different backgrounds. Ramiro is a Mexican-American boy who lives on the poor side of El Paso, and Jake is a rich wasp. So they're very different, they're from very different backgrounds, but as circumstances in both of their lives begin to spiral out of control, Jake and Ram turn to each other for comfort, friendship and understanding. And it says no one else realizes what it's like to know that all of your problems stem from one thing, that your father didn't even care enough to say goodbye. So that sounds really interesting. I always love Benjamin Alira Sanz's writing, and I think I gave all of the books that I've read by him, which are 3 now, 5 stars. So I have high hopes for this one as well. On spot number 4 we've got Lover, which is such a wonderful, happy album. I love the cover of the album. I think if we're doing this based on cover alone, it would be at the top. But it also has some really great songs. I really love the title song, Lover. I love Paper Rings, I love False God, I love The Man. And for this album I decided to go for the prompt, a book that's been on your TBR for a very long time, which was for the song I Forgot That You Existed. And for that I chose Maybe This Time by Jill Mansell. Jill Mansell used to be one of my favorite authors and I still really love her books, but when I was a teenager I read almost exclusively her books, which I bought 1 or 2 at a time at my local bookstore because they had an entire shelf of them. They had a lot of them and I just devoured them. They are romance novels, rom-com type things, and I really love them. I've had this one on my shelves for quite some time. It's definitely not the book that's been on my TBR for the longest, but I kind of had to pick this book because this year I'm also participating in the Buzzword Reading Challenge, which means that every month I'm reading a book with a certain buzzword in the title. And this month the buzzword is time, and this is actually the only book on my shelves that has the word time in it that I haven't read yet, so I had to fit it in somehow. I'm not entirely sure what it's about, but I know I always love her novels, so I'm probably gonna love this one too. It's about Mimi, it says here, who isn't looking for love when she spends a weekend in Goosebrook, the Cotswolds village her dad has moved to. But of course she does fall in love, I think, or at least meet someone she likes. When they meet again 4 years later, it's still not to be. It seems as if something or someone else always gets in their way. Will it ever be the right time for both of them? I'm gonna find out. We're down to the top 3, and on the 3rd spot there's 1989, which I love. It's full of hits. I love Shake It Off, I love Blank Space, I love Wildest Dreams, I love Style, I love Out of the Woods. There are just so many good songs on that album and I really, really love it. And for this album I went for the prompt read a book with a morally great character, which is for the song Bad Blood, and I went for the Penelope ad by Margaret Atwood. If you saw my latest video, I think it was my latest video, you saw me struggling pronouncing the title of this book, but since then I watched a video by Jean from Jean Bookish Thoughts, and I heard her pronounce it as the Penelopiad, so I'm just going to go with that because she's the expert. But the Penelopiad is a Greek mythology retelling. It is about Penelope, who is Odysseus's wife, and it's about what she went through when Odysseus went away for the Trojan War and the Odyssey, basically. I think it's told after her death. She wanders the underworld, it says on the back, and she's telling her own side of the story, a tale of lust, greed and murder. And I decided to go for this for the morally grey character because basically all of the characters in Greek mythology are morally grey. So I think Penelope will be morally grey as well, especially since she's written by Margaret Atwood. I haven't read a Margaret Atwood novel in a while, so I'm looking forward to reading this. We're down to the last two albums, which are also the two most recent ones, and I love both of them a lot. But I decided to go for Folklore on number 2, which is the earliest of the two. Really thought Evermore wasn't going to top Folklore for me because I loved Folklore so much, but somehow it happened. I love a lot of the songs from Folklore. It's just such a great album. I really don't know how to describe my love for it, but I listen to it a lot. It's very comforting, but it's also kind of sad. There are some beautiful, beautiful songs on there. My favorite is probably Exile, which is the duet she did with Bon Iver, but I also love Cardigan, I love The One, I love Mad Woman, I love Betty. I love all of the songs, basically. And for this I went for the prompt read a book based on mythology, or a retelling, which is obviously connected to the title of the album, Folklore. And for this I went for another Greek mythology novel, namely The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I read one of her other novels, Circe, last year, and I gave it 5 stars because I adored it. That one was a retelling of Circe's story from Greek mythology, and this one tells the story of Achilles and Patroclus. I know quite a bit about them already because I read The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker a few years ago. If you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I hated that book. But I really have high hopes for this one because I've heard so many good things about this novel. I've heard that it's really beautiful. It's about their love story, I think, Achilles and Patroclus, and their friendship, and it's also about the Trojan War. And I'm still really interested in the story, even though I didn't like The Silence of the Girls, and I really love Madeline Miller's writing. So I'm excited to get to it. And then we've reached number 1 on the list, Evermore, which is such a good album. I love it so much. I love Champagne Problems, Gold Rush, I adore Nobody No Crime. There are so many good songs on that album as well. I'm absolutely amazed at how she managed to make 2 such amazing albums in 1 year during a lockdown and a pandemic. I'm really glad she did though, because they really brought me a lot of comfort in this weird time. But as for the readathon, I decided to go for the prompt read a mystery or a thriller for the song Nobody No Crime. And I decided to read a Sherlock Holmes story. I'm going to read The Sign of the Four, which is the second novel, second story in the Sherlock Holmes series, universe type thing. I read A Study in Scarlet is the first one, I think, a few years ago because I wanted to read all of them in order, and then I kind of just stopped afterwards, even though I really enjoyed it. I also read The Hound of the Baskervilles a couple of years ago before I decided to do this and actually read them chronologically, but I've got a really big complete Sherlock Holmes, so I will be able to read them all at some point. I really don't know what The Sign of the Four is about, I just know that it's the next one that was published, so I'm going to read it, and I'm excited about it because I love Sherlock Holmes, I love Dr. Watson, it's going to be great. And that's my TBR for March for Tis the Damn Readathon. There are 7 books on this list and 1 audiobook on top of that, so 8 books in total, which is a bit of a stretch for me. Not really a stretch, it's going to be a bit of a challenge, so I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to read all of them, but if not, there are some of the other prompts, like for 1989 I think you can also make a cocktail or a mocktail for Shake It Off, so I could do that instead of read the Penelopiad. So I'll probably be able to complete a prompt for every album regardless. So that's it for this video. After this I'm going to try to braid my hair the way Taylor Swift did for the cover of Evermore, which you can see right here. If the thumbnail of this video includes a braid like that, then I succeeded. If not, I probably made a big mess of it or was just too lazy. Anyway, in the comments please let me know what your favorite Taylor Swift album is if you like Taylor Swift. If not, please let me know what you're reading in March. I'd love to chat about it. Please like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos in the future, and have a wonderful day. Bye!